Welcome back to the Bodhi Surfboards YouTube channel. Today we're on day 6 of Jono's build of his 9 and a bit foot mal. Today we're going to be putting the rails on, so we're going to show you how to set up the table, how to cut the timber for the rails, and then how to plug them on. What we've done before that is basically ensure that the outside of the board is nice and square. We've put in a few blocks here and there. Side. So anywhere that we actually went through the skirt of the board, is that in there, Jono? Anywhere we went through the skirt of the board, we've just rebuilt it and made sure that it's nice and clean. What you can see on top of the board here is that I've actually marked anywhere that there's a solid piece, and that will be important for the next stage of plugging the rails on. What we'll do is show you how to set up this table and then show you the rail timber and then get started. The first thing is setting up the table, and the most important so in this series of today's video, what I'm going to try and do is say this is the most important thing less than 50 times, because in the last videos that I've watched I say this is the most important thing about 50-60 times. So the most important thing is the builder's film, and the reason for that is that the glue will peel off it. If you don't have that, it will cause you all sorts of grief. So builder's film is really good to have on the table. So lay that down first. I take this down, and it's obviously been used a gazillion times, but like I say, the glue will actually peel off it. The polyurethane that we're using, you can stick metal to glass, but it won't stick to the builder's film. Now, the first thing on here is I've got a couple of towels, and the reason for the towels is to create a little bit of height underneath the board. That will make sense in a little bit, but basically it's to create a space on the rail that we can pin into. So what we're doing is actually stapling the first layer of the rail into the board, and that's a nice secure fit, but it's also a quick process. So you can put the solid Polonia rails on the board, but you might find that it takes 3 or 4 days to get your rails on. Using this process, we can get all the rails on in hopefully 2 to 3 hours, and it's really nice and secure, and it's a nice clean line, and the bendy ply that we use will adhere to a nice clean shape. So we've got a gap underneath the board. We've got blocks at either end to make sure the board doesn't tip, and I've just got these risers on the side so it doesn't rock side to side. So the board's going to sit up here, and what you can see is that that's pretty stable. It's not going anywhere. It's not really going anywhere sideways. What I will do is chuck a couple of weights on there just to make sure it's secure. And then the last thing that I look at is the height of it. So I'll show you with the next part. The nose of the board is about 1100 high, so it's about 11 centimeters off the surface of the table. So what I've done is cut the bendy ply at 1200. So 12 centimeters, and the tail of the board is about 900 off. And again, that's to give us some space above and below the board. But as you can see so far, what we've done is created a nice secure platform for the board. So the next thing is just looking at the timber. Okay, so what we've got here is a bendy ply. So you can get this from specialty building supply stores. They use it for architectural features and boat building and stuff like that. But basically with this stuff, you can roll it. So it's got a smooth side on there and a porous side and a pin line through the middle. The standard sheet is 2440 by 1220, which is a standard sheet of ply. And this is what's called a crossband. You can get a long band, but the long band will roll into a drum, if you imagine the sheet. The crossband will roll into a cylinder or a pillar, which is what we want, I think. No, we want the opposite. So we want it to roll into a drum. So again, it is called crossband. If you say that you want a 5mm crossband bendy ply, they'll know what you mean at a specialty timber supplier. So I've cut 6 strips. So the way that we design our boards is that you only need 3 thicknesses of this bendy ply on each side of the board to create a rail. So I've cut 6 strips of 100mm. Now they'll go basically through the guts of the board to the tail, but what I've also done is cut a couple of strips at, these are at 1250, so 12.5 centimetres, and they're to go around the nose. And that's it. So again, it's a crossband bendy ply, and that's what you want it to do. And this will adhere to that nose shape, which is ideal, and it will conform to a nice clean shape, so it'll clean up any anomalies or features you've put into your board. Okay, so we're going to put the nose piece on the board first, and the reason for that is that we can just join the rail up to it. So if you have a look at the height of the timber here, this is the piece that's cut at 1250 or 12.5 centimetres tall. Now, it is the most important thing, but the whole process is designed so this ply will actually just sit on the table. So the reason that we squared everything up at the start is so everything just sits there. So if you just show that length there, Jono. So this is just going to sit there. You don't want to be pushing things in and out. If we push in at the bottom, it's going to push out at the top, and then that will create an air gap that basically you don't want to have to correct things like that. So whenever you're putting the rails on, just make sure that everything's sitting on the table. If you have to use your muscles to do anything, you haven't done something correctly. You shouldn't need big muscles to build a surfboard. And everything's designed that you should be able to do everything by yourself. So what I'm doing is just using a clamp to create that shape. Everything's nice and flat on the table, and I'm just going to draw a line around here. And the reason for that is that I know where I'm going to glue. All I want to glue at this stage is onto the deck surface. So once you've drawn your line, what I say in the shed is basically whichever way you take it off the table, which is like that, that's the way it's going to go on the table, which is over here for gluing up. So I use 2 setups, and again, more builder's film on there, and this is the shape of the board. Yeah. Okay, so I've laid a bead of glue down here. Now, the first side that we're going to put towards the board is the white side, which is fairly flat, it's not porous. And what I want to do is create a screed across the glue. So when you look across that into the light, you can see that it's basically glassy the whole way. And so what I class it as is this is glassy and this is fat. You don't want the glue to be fat because when it expands, it can push the rail off the board. But what you also don't want is for it to be dry. So when you do it, you don't really want to hear your paddle cruising across the timber. You really just want to drag the glue. So like I say, it's just a bit of a screed, and that's just a nice clean pass. Just a little squidge more. So again, the reason that I've done it like this is that I know exactly where the rail's going to sit. So that's the only place that I need to glue. Okay, so this is the way that I've put this panel onto the table. So once I do that pass, have a look down it. It's nice and glassy the whole way. There's nothing's too fat on there. There's nothing dry. So what I'm going to do is just pick it up in exactly the same way. Across to the table, and there's plenty of working time with the glue, but I'm just going to clamp that on there again. So, and then grab the staple gun. Okay, so this is basically, it is just a staple gun. It's called a wide crown staple. We're just using a 10mm galvanised staple to put it into the board. Now I'll just get you to shoot down here, Jono. What we're looking at doing, that light, is putting the staple into the rail like that. Now we don't want it high and we don't want it low, because when you shape you will get it. So basically wherever I've put blue or blue chalk, I know that I can pin into those areas. Now anywhere that it's a bit thin, say around the nose, I can go sideways. But basically I'll just show you how that works. So yeah, PPE is important. Grab some goggles. I wear earmuffs just because the noise is a bit pingy. And we'll plug this first rail in. So what you can see here is that the rail has conformed to the shape that we've created. Now there's a few bits that look like there's gaps. That's okay, because the ply is creating a correct curve. So anything that hasn't been exactly correct, this is actually fixing it up. So that's the first layer. That's as simple as it is. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to do the first side rail, and then I'm going to leave it to Jono to do the next one. And then the next layer is a little bit different, so I'll be back and then I'm just going to leave Jono to it. Okay, so this is the side rail that's going to go on, and that's basically just going to attach to the side of the board there. But what I'm going to do is just square this up so it's a better join. So I've just got a rasp file. I'm just going to bring that here and just take a bit of an edge off on an angle. Enough. And if you have a look at that again now, it's a nice clean join, where basically where the rail is nice and clean, and that's what we want. So now that that's clean, I'm going to draw the line on the inside again. So this is the length of the board. So there. That's the way I've put the rail on, so that's the way I'm going to take it off and put it on this bench. Make sure there's no dust on it. And then lay this out. So you can always put more glue on. So better to start with less than more. Paddle. So through the middle of the board here is where we've put that towel on the table, so it's left a 5-10mm gap. So the shape of the board, thinnest parts to the end, widest part in the middle. So if you have a look down there, Jono, from this way into the light, there's just a little part through here that's a bit dry. Again, this is the thickest part, so I'm just going to lay a thin bead along here. The less you touch this, the better. But give it a whirl. Now, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on the end here, because this is where it's going to join to the nose piece. That's the way I put it on the table. That's where I'm going to take it off. This part is important. You don't want to push down on the side of the board too much, so if you do put any pressure on it, put pressure on the side. I'm just going to do a join here. And then cruise along sideways. I'm going to keep the head of the staple gun on. I'm going to make sure that it's not twisted and that it's not on an angle, and that it's in the middle of the rail. It's not going to be too high or too low, and that is just a perception thing. I'm going to keep the head of the gun on. I'm not going to lift it like that, so I'm going to drag it along and make sure there's no air bubbles in there. This is the thickest part of the board, so this is where there's basically a 10mm gap under here, so that's going to sit in there like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is put the next rail on, and we're going to do that by putting the porous side of the timber to the porous side. Now the reason that we do that is that in this bendy ply is a pin line. Now if we put those two pin lines together, it creates a nice pin stripe, and we actually use that as a shaping guide further down the process. Now we don't know where the rail is, we sort of do, but what we're going to do is basically it's going to sit on there like that. Again, it's going to sit nice and flat on the table, so you shouldn't have to do any work. But what we're going to do is basically put glue on the whole lot. So that's the way I put it on, that's the way I'm going to take it off, and then that's the way I'm going to put it on this table. Get a brush. So with the glue on this porous side, what I want to do is actually create a seal on the timber. Now the reason that I want to do that is that if I just put a nice clean screed like that, within a couple of minutes that's actually going to soak in. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually push it into the timber. Now what this is doing is aerating the glue, and what you'll see is that starts to get frothy. Not as frothy as Jono, but frothy. And that's going to create a seal, and then once we've created that seal, then we'll run the glue in the approximate shape of the rail. So you can see that that's starting to thicken up now. It's nice and white and foamy, and basically that's sealed. So if you have a look into the light there, you can see that there's dry patches and wet patches. So again, we want it nice and glassy, not too fat. It's really important on this layer because if the glue is too thick, it's actually going to push it off the board. So just the right amount is the right amount. So that looks pretty good. I'm just going to do a quick bead across the top. So that shape is basically going to go like this, which is the shape of the nose. Well, that's where the rail is going to sit anyway. So what we did was pin the first layer of the rail into the board, but what we want to do is pin these rails into each other. And the reason for that is so we can cut them off and cut out all the excess weight later. The general rule is a thumb width above the deck and a thumb width apart. If the staples are placed too wide, you'll actually get a scalloping from the glue. So it's pretty important that they're in the right spot. So about a thumb width above and a thumb width apart. I'm going to start on the nose, make sure that's nice and flush and nice and tight at the bottom. Now as soon as that is on, that top layer, what we're going to do is flip the board over and pin around the bottom just to make sure that glue doesn't activate and actually push itself off. So that little gap in there, to me, it's not worth it. You'll only ever build the board once, so might as well knock it out. So I'm just going to straighten that up, cut it on that angle. So it's a nice clean join there. That's the way it's on the table. That's the way you're going to put it on. It's not the most important thing, but it's super important. Try not to get glue on the table. If you get glue on the table, what will happen is next time you put the layer down, you'll get it on the back and things will go really ugly really quickly. Jono? Got it?
Got it.
Okay. So this is about the same width as that board. So what you can do is basically just screed it along so it's like a grader on the road. If you just go like this, everything's just going to file out the sides. So we might make this a bit thinner. So you can just move it around like this and really try not to get it on the table. So Jono's just asked if he's ready. So what we're looking at is the fact that you can see this porous nature to the timber. You can see the texture, so that to me is looking like it's dry. So Jono's going to put another layer on to make it look glassy, but glassy, not fat. If there's too much glue, it will push itself off the rail. So just a little bit more glue and then plug it on. Okay, so we're going to do a crossover here, and it really is just a perceptual thing. We're just looking at how deep it is from the top of the board, and we need to be able to fit a jigsaw blade in between the pins and the deck. So like I say, a thumb width above and a thumb width apart is a nice spacing. So that's just a crossover. So we've flipped the board over so we can pin the other side so the glue doesn't activate and start pushing itself off. Now one thing you want to watch is that when you come through the middle here, you still need to get a jigsaw blade on the next stage underneath the pin and in between the deck. So when you come through the middle, it's really important to get this stake as high as possible. And again, that's why the towels are underneath, is to create this gap. So when I said before that it'll make sense later, what we wanted is this lip, because we need to be able to put the pin at the top and get a that jigsaw blade underneath. So with the head of this gun, I can make it look like it's hanging off here, but the staple will still punch in. So thumb width apart, thumb width above, doesn't really matter here. We just need it as high as possible off the deck while still pinning it together. Okay, so we're going to do the last rail layer now, which is the white side to the white side, and that's going to help us to create this pin line or pin stripe that we're going to use as a shaping guide. So same principle is that we're just going to coat this. We don't need to push the glue in, so it's just making it nice and glassy. Whack that on, and then Jono's going to do the last rails, and then that's it. Woo! Then curry. That's the end of today. Jono's put his rails on. The next stage of the build is we'll trim this off using a jigsaw. So in between the deck and the pins that we've put in, and then the flush cut round a bit, and then it's all hand shaping. So this is the end of the build stage really, and then the fun begins. So that's it. Good job, Jono. You.